Aloha kakayaka kako. Good morning. Aloha. When I told Madeline our topic, I said slipping into darkness. But it kind of morphed into something else called marching into darkness. The retreat from reason. I'd like to start out by sharing a poem that was written in 1920 by William Butler Yeats. It's called The Second Coming. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born? William Butler Yeats wrote this poem while Europe and much of the world was trying to recover from World War I. At the time, the world had never seen such destruction and loss of human life. Not only the war, but the Spanish flu had taken its toll. Social and economic troubles were everywhere, and the world seemed to be spinning out of control. He saw a world in which technology was progressing beyond our ability to control it, and those who did control it only did so for the benefit of a select few. Like Yeats, many of us rise up in the morning and feel a certain uneasiness that things aren't going to turn out well. The feeling that the future holds little promise and things will never get back to normal. Meanwhile, others look at the craziness around us and see signs that the second coming is at hand, that some Messiah will come and lead us back to sanity. Others of us aren't so hopeful. Let me call your attention to the fourth of our Unitarian Universalist principles. We affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We believe that each person should be free to search for whatever is right and true in their lives. This sounds like such a reasonable, civilized idea that we might well ponder, how could anybody disagree with it? Yet, even as we speak, this principle is under attack in this country. In fact, there's been an unrelenting assault on an ability to determine the truth, and it's being waged in our media, in our schools, in our government, and even in our churches. While many liberal ministers shy away from anything resembling controversy, there are literally legions of those on the other side, like Franklin Graham, Jim Baker, Jerry Falwell, who pride themselves on their connections and influence over those who hold political and judicial power. They loudly proclaim their intention of making their version of Christianity the basis of life in this country. The courts have already been packed with these zealots, and we're in danger of slipping into a new dark age. So as we take a look at our flaming chalice, remember that it's our task to keep alive the light of truth and justice in an otherwise increasingly dark and ignorant world. Does this sound alarmist? I hope so. Critical reasoning is a valuable tool for uncovering what's wrong with the world. It was because people began to use critical reasoning that the world eventually emerged from the Dark Ages centuries ago. If not for the dedication of those who refused to allow the church to dictate the truth, there would never have been an age of enlightenment. The courageous men and women who decided that their intellect, rather than their blind faith, did their best to banish superstition, ignorance, intolerance, and exploitation. And here, as I have the military jets flying over here, making all this noise, yet we can't afford to feed our people. Something is very wrong. The enlightenment and use of ignorance, the enlightenment and use of reason has never been universally embraced. And so the social change it brings is reason enough for some to oppose it, especially those who value stability and authority above all else. Tolerance threatens moral absolutists. Science challenges superstition, and reason frightens those with insecure beliefs, as well as those who seek to use our ignorance against us. It seems to me that in recent years, especially the last 4 years, the forces of ignorance have been gaining on us. Irrational beliefs prepare the ground for the politics of emotion, the tempting shortcut to power for those without logical arguments. The politics of emotion win out over the politics of reason. Picture a certain demagogue, who shall remain nameless, in front of a crowd, whipping up their fears and hatreds. Pretty soon, the crowd's jumping up and down and hooting and hollering. Now picture a different speaker in front of a crowd, calmly, quietly urging them to sit down and carefully think through an issue. Who will get more media attention? Who will get more listeners, more supporters? The simplistic politics of emotion can be seen in issues like abortion, LGBT rights that polarize the country, extremist positions spouted on talk radio, and in the resulting decline of decency and cooperation. The rise of the political and radical right is the ultimate politics of emotion. But this state of affairs didn't come out of nowhere. James Luther Adams, the great Unitarian Universalist theologian, warned us that before long we would be fighting what he called Christian fascists. He was at the time teaching ethics at Harvard Divinity School, while Pat Robertson and other prominent evangelists began speaking of a new political religion that would direct its efforts at taking control of all major American institutions, including mainstream denominations and the government, so as to transform the United States into a global Christian empire. At the time, it was hard to take such a claim seriously. But fascism, Adams warned, would come cloaked in the language of the Bible, carrying crosses and chanting the Pledge of Allegiance. Adams had watched American intellectuals and industrialists flirt with fascism in the 1930s. Mussolini's corporatism, which created an unfettered industrial and business aristocracy, appealed to many of the rich people at the time as a counterweight to the New Deal. In 1934, Fortune magazine lavished praise on the Italian dictator for his crushing of labor unions, empowerment of the industrialists at the expense of the workers. Then as now, Adams said, too many liberals fail to understand the power and allure of evil. And when the radical Christians came, the people would undoubtedly play by the old, polite rules of democracy long after those in power had begun to dismantle the democratic state. Adams had watched German academics fall silent or conform. He knew how desperately people wanted to believe the comfortable lies told by authoritarians. And yes, we see the same thing going on today. So I still ask myself, how things managed to get this crazy? How could so many people not see the obvious? When 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 we find written, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved, God will send them a powerful delusion, leading them to believe what is false. We've convinced ourselves to believe in falsehoods and myths. And of course, have had help in being convinced. The media has been a powerful force for indoctrinating most Americans to accept the lies much more readily than to see the truth of things. Principles of advertising and propaganda have been studied since the early 20th century and are a big part of our lives, even if we don't notice, especially if we don't notice. Our mass media has become a tool for selling everything from cars to candidates, and we far too often fall for the sales pitch. Political arguments are given in sound bites of no more than 30 seconds each, guaranteed not to give us any real understanding of the issues, but to inflame our emotions, either for or against whatever the owner of that particular media outlet wants us to believe. By encouraging gullibility, media makes us more vulnerable to whichever snake oil peddler has the best sales pitch. So whether we like it or not, whether we consider ourselves religious or not, we live in a world which is largely shaped by media images and religious symbolism that are often strangely connected in the popular mind. These symbols and images have been the cause of too much bloodshed and pain. They have dulled our ability to reason. Far too many Americans have bought into what amounts to a new form of blasphemy and idolatry. It threatens to lead us all into the brink of Armageddon and to engulf the world in a suicidal struggle between competing religious sides, each of whom believe that they and they alone have the truth. The stage has been set for a return to the time when religion actually did rule the world. And yes, there was such a time. That was why it was called the Dark Ages. So, as we look at today, how is any of this possible? Well, surveys show Americans to be poorly informed, not just about politics, but about the entire world around them. It's obvious that we pay a heavy price for our ignorance. In a civilization that runs on technology, we might be concerned that over 90% of Americans are considered scientifically illiterate. Because we don't know how things work, we quit thinking about it. We instead focus on games and entertainments that distract us from thinking about what's going on in the world. We stop trying to figure things out, leave it to the experts, who more often than not turn out to not have our interests in mind. It's almost common knowledge that most Americans can't or don't think logically about much of anything anymore. In fact, we have trouble following the reasoning of anything beyond an 8th grade level of comprehension. We have an attention span of about 3 minutes, according to some researchers. And of course, this doesn't bode well for logical, rational thinking. If we can't think logically, on what basis will we evaluate competing claims that we're called on to believe? Politicians and con artists are more than happy to use our collective ignorance against us. Carl Sagan saw the danger. He said in his book, The Demon-Haunted World, I have a foreboding of an America in my children or grandchildren's time, when the United States is a service and information economy, when nearly all the key manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues. When the people have lost their ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority. When clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slip almost without noticing back into superstition and darkness. And so, dear friends, the future belongs and depends on each of us, and whether or not we dare to speak the truth consistently and powerfully to those around us. It depends on each of us being willing to reach out with love and kindness to those around us while we engage the powers that be. We must dare to keep alive the light of knowledge and reason in an otherwise increasingly dark and ignorant world. We must keep our eyes on the prize. Keep our eyes on the bright and shining ideal of the true beloved community, even as we must deal with the world as it is and threatens to be for some time to come. So whatever the outcome of the next election, let us not be discouraged by the darkness and difficulty of our times. Let us recapture the prophetic zeal of our forebears and remember that our job is to be the conscience of the nation, to speak the truth so as to free our fellow human beings from enslavement to the lie. Let us go forth and do spiritual battle using the weapons of truth, love, compassion, and understanding. That is our task. As it says in the concluding lines of Ephesians, we must stand therefore and fasten the belt of truth around your waist and put on the breastplate of righteousness. So as we look again at our flaming chalice, remember that even in the darkest of time, the light of intellect and reason, tempered by faith in our common humanity, still shines. That our lives so shine as to illuminate an otherwise dark and ignorant world. In that way we can rest assured that a second coming of enlightenment will occur. And it will come when humanity learns to embrace truth and finally awakens from its long sleep. Aloha, Amen, blessed be, Shalom.